Hearts getting bigger. That's one of the things we're here for. That's one of the reasons why we're alive. But we do trip up, do we not? We have a lot of ways where we're tripping up. One of the ways that breaks my heart that we're tripping up is that we're still in an age and an era, and this might sound funny, but it's something that's been driving me a little crazy lately. We're still in an age and an era where we point out and celebrate when we consider all human beings as equal, worthy, and divine. The fact that we still celebrate when a parent doesn't disown a child because they're LGBTQ. The fact that we celebrate because I might be someone that celebrates my trans brothers and sisters. The fact that we still celebrate someone that is open to gay marriage, or someone that believes in equality for all people, someone that sees injustice in a nation that was born on the backs of slavery and thievery of land. The fact that we're still celebrating that consciousness, to me, is a bit troubling and a bit sad. But does that mean we shouldn't celebrate it? Absolutely not. Because we need to be praising the things we want to see more of. We need to be praising those things that are emanations of God consciousness, those things that show that we have a right idea and ideal in the mind of God and that we are expressing it as humanity on earth. But it is no doubt troubling that it is still a day and a time and an age where we're still awakening collectively to that knowing that we are all born blessed, and that in this life we make a heaven or a hell of it. I think the true purpose of spiritual practice and of religion is to break our hearts open, to expand our hearts to such a degree that, as Marianne Williamson says, that every child on this planet, every adult, every child, every human being is treated and considered by the self as if you are the mother and it is your sole child on the planet. Marianne Williamson says we should be in that state of consciousness where we consider everyone on the planet as being a mother's only child. Can we embrace that kind of a vision for our world, for humanity? Is that not what we were born for? Anything less than that is falling short of the spiritual ideal, the God ideal that we were created to demonstrate and reflect. If religion doesn't make your heart grow bigger, it's not religion, is it? It's an ideology, it's a construct, and possibly even a construct that's meant to constrict or meant to control possibly someone or something, maybe even our own minds. But a spiritual practice has a deep purpose. If a spiritual practice or religion leads us to judge, to condemn, to hate, to take, to exclude, instead of to love, understand, unite, give, and expand, it falls short of love. It falls short of what I believe it's intended to be. If our religion leads us and teaches us into division and exclusion, if it draws us to tell our children that they're going to some far-off place called hell if they don't do X, Y, or Z, if it causes mothers and fathers to disown their own children, or leads people to crucifixions right here on the planet, then it falls short. If our religion or our spiritual practice leads us anywhere other than a compassionate heart, a desire for understanding, and a heart that is so broken open that we include everything and everyone else, then at least I know it's not for me. If your Jesus tells people they are less than love, that they are less than worthy, all I can say is that's not Jesus. Martin Luther King said, the self cannot be the self without others. This idea of apocalypse, this idea of a new coming, a new understanding, a new revelation, an unraveling, an unfolding, is an idea that has been known in spiritual practitioners throughout time. It's up to us to decide if the time is now that we embody it fully and completely to the greatest extent of the spiritual law and the human experience. The self cannot be the self without other selves. So what is being uncovered? Our spiritual practice is here to support us, to nourish us, to grow us, and to help us change our view and make our hearts grow bigger. So how big can our hearts be? Here's the litmus test. When we engage in our spiritual practice, does our spiritual practice make us feel more alive? Does it make us feel more safe? And does it make us feel more connected with all of life? When it does, we're on the right track. When it doesn't, well, that's just ordinary, isn't it? That's just ordinary. But we know we create a heaven and hell right here and right now. The spiritual teacher Osho said, "You are your hell and your heaven too." In Unity, we teach that heaven and hell are not places you go to someday. They exist right now within us as states of consciousness. Whether we're in the physical body or not in physical form, they're states of consciousness. And we are here to create a state of consciousness in the world collectively. And our spiritual practice is here to help us be accountable to these principles right here and now, to call us to live our values and to say, what does it look like? What does what I believe in look like in the world? If I believe in equality but I'm silent, what does that say? If I believe in a world that works for all but I don't speak up when it's not working for all, what does that say? Do I stay comfortable having my own needs met, or do I expand my sense of self to everyone around me? Every issue is our issue. Every child is our child. Until we see that truth and experience that truth in a full and feeling way, we have not fully awakened. Our spiritual practice is not so that we stick our heads in the sand or have to turn off our TV. Our spiritual practice is what actually allows us to engage in the world around us and have a deep, grounding sense of peace, even in the midst of human emotions. Our spiritual practice is not that which allows us to disengage, but it allows us, in fact, to engage from a deep spiritual practice and from a space and a place of power. There is an author, Angel Kyoto Williams. She wrote the book Being Black and also the book Radical Dharma. She said, mindfulness that is divorced from social justice is navel-gazing. Mindfulness that is divorced from social justice is navel-gazing. Marianne Williamson, who studies and teaches the Course in Miracles and is a great spiritual teacher of our time, says that we have to stop the cycle of psychological disengagement. Moral outrage is not born out of anger, it is born out of love. Pursuit of higher consciousness is not separate from showing up for the suffering of the human condition. In fact, when we show up for the human condition, we are liberating ourselves. When we liberate ourselves, liberating others, it goes both ways. We cannot liberate other without liberating ourselves, and vice versa. There was the funniest quote that I ran across this week about heaven and hell, and it says this: how can heaven and hell coexist? This is in the traditional sense. How? Because there's been a lot going on with a lot of agnostics and atheists, right? I don't argue with anyone when they say, religion, throw it out. I don't even try to argue with that, because there are a lot of reasons today, aren't there? So many reasons for people to say, ugh. But no one would argue, I don't think, no one would argue with a spiritual practice that engages us at a level that we break our hearts open and include everyone as self. I don't think that would be argued with. But this is the funny quote that I ran across this week. It says, how can heaven and hell coexist? How can any sane and loving human being be happy in heaven knowing, and this is a funny thing to think of, how could you be happy in the traditional sense of heaven? Like, la, 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 we're in heaven. How could any sane and loving human being be happy in heaven knowing that millions of people, innocent or not, are being tortured for eternity? This heaven is a place void of empathy, an asylum for psychopaths. How is this heaven good? It stopped me in my tracks. But that idea, the insanity of the idea that I could be in a state of that, whoo, life is great when there is suffering, whether it's right here and right now or whether it's when we're in our freedom form, if we are all one, and in fact our principles are true, that we are one, and we live this in the very fabric of our being, from the smallest thought to the very largest of actions, if that is the truth, then we all live from the same vibrational field of energy. And when I lift another up, I lift mine up, and I cannot lift myself up without lifting another. It's impossible that, in fact, if I am stepping on another, I am pushing myself down. Know it or not, I am. Martin Luther King, I've been watching a lot of his, or not watching, but watching or listening to a lot of the YouTube videos on his sermons lately. And one that struck me, he said, I am not just going to liberate the blacks in the South. I'm going to liberate the whites from the hate in their hearts. I am not going to just liberate blacks from the South. I am going to liberate the whites from the hate in their heart. See, he knew at a fabric level, in the cornerstones of his actions and the core of his being, he knew that no one is liberated until we are all liberated. And in fact, in one of these amazing talks, he went on to say how we talk so much about how oppression hurts the oppressed. And he said, it is even more, and he doesn't use these words, these are mine, but it is even more grotesque for the oppressor. That it turns someone inside, that there is an ugliness that comes, there is a separation, there is a darkness that comes within when we engage in that. So whether we know it or not, to relieve those parts in our heart and our mind, to lift us up in every moment so that we may be broken open to see what is in front of us, what is around us, and what is inside of us, so we can release ideas and illusions of separation and step into our unity consciousness and our oneness. To liberate. In order to do this, we have to make the shift from me to we. Do we not? And in New Thought, this is interesting. This is interesting because we do so much work, so much tuning fork work, where it's like, if I do my own work, I focus on everything within, that is the birthplace of everything. And that is absolutely true. But like all good spiritual truths, there is a paradox and there is a paradigm shift if you take it too far. If you take that idea that I am just to look at me and only to work on my own mind and my own consciousness in my own little space, then you have recognized the first coming. You have recognized the practice of self-enlightenment awakening that was demonstrated in the master teacher, but not the second coming. The second coming is the collective awakening. It is the awakening where all of us together co-create in alignment with what we call God consciousness, from God mind, from divine ideals. And we are not liberated in our fullness. We are not fully awakened or enlightened until we recognize that as above, so below, as within, so it is in the outer as well. So let us not stop short in our practice and get stuck navel gazing. That's not going to do anyone any good, is it? We're not here, and we know we're not here to be focused only on our limited or selfish interests, only to consider the quality of our own lives. But we are here to have the purpose of showing up for each other, to benefit society, So when we move from the stages of spiritual development, just like a child is always in me and I, and that's a good stage of development to be in when you're younger, that's a beautiful place to be because you're starting to learn about yourself. You're doing what, can translate to this me work. But we're just like grown-up toddlers if we stay in that state of spiritual development. The next stage is to move from benefiting just me to benefiting my family and my friends, and the next to benefiting and seeing as myself my tribe. But beyond that, it's my nation, it's my globe, and then it's everything on the planet, and it's the entire cosmos. And then it's the realization that I am here to be an expression and emanation of light and God. I am here to co-create a world that works for all, and in order to do that, I relate to everything that is seemingly outside of myself, knowing that is a veil of illusion. There is a great teacher, the Rabbi Lerner. If you haven't looked into his work, he does a lot of great social and spiritual work. Rabbi Lerner talks about our awakening. He says, we become fully human when we come to know ourselves through a process of recognition by the other, whom we simultaneously recognize as a self-constituting subject capable of reflecting God's goodness and love, and as capable of seeing those same capacities within us. This mutual recognition is recognition not only of that which is unique within each one of us, but also and most deeply of what we have in common. The way that the creative energy of God manifests in each of us, making it possible for us to be free, creative, loving, caring, spiritually sensitive, conscious, and self-transforming beings who both receive and embody God's energy. He goes on to say, but transcendence is only possible, not inevitable. Each generation has layered into its psyche structures, the histories of the past failures of transcendence, the accumulated legacy of the world of oppression. Those failures are embodied in the increasingly textured and powerful structures of domination that shape social order, just as they are embodied in the individual psyche and belief system. The system of persecution and oppression does not inhabit only the external world, although it is importantly and certainly there. It also infects our internal world of belief and feeling. He says, but in every generation, people have been unable to stay with the vision of God and have instead turned God into something that would fit the current level of development of human consciousness as it has evolved through history up until that moment. People can only understand God within the categories and consciousness that they actually have. I'm going to read that last part again. In every generation, people have been unable to fully stay with that vision of God and instead have turned God into something that would fit the current level of development of human consciousness as it has evolved through history up until that moment. People can only understand God within the categories and consciousness that they actually have. I often repeat the idea that we flip it. You know, the idea that we're created in God's image and likeness. We often in this human condition create God in our own image and likeness and not the divine one, our own limited image and likeness. Are we ready for a world that throws that out? We're going to be leading that world, friends. In our spiritual tradition, we're going to be leading that world. It's no mistake that our name is unity. Our part, our spiritual practice, involves claiming and reclaiming our inner authority and our power to create our lives and to determine our state of being, which correctly applied creates the external reality of empowerment, collective actualization, and a world that works for all. Internal spiritual work, deeply and truly realized, equates to and expresses as the power of our collective love. That love demonstrated in action. it manifests and it magnifies our ability to co-create a world that works for all, to co-create a world where there is equal opportunity, a world where we are expressing God consciousness. Marianne Williamson also said, enlightenment doesn't say that I am the master, give me power. It says, how can I serve? It says, how can I serve? So how can we serve? We serve every time we step into the full consciousness of oneness, of unity, out of our separate sense of self, even out of our new thought bubble that says, all I have to look at is right here, all I have to look at is right here. If that practice is making it so we can't open our eyes, that's not the depth of the practice, that's something else. That's a stage. And it's a stage we all go through. The time on this planet where we can afford to focus just here has expired. So if you haven't awoken yet, that's okay. It's not about not doing your own spiritual work. It's not about not doing it here. Just know that we got to do this work out here as we do this work in here, because we are now in the era of the second coming. And it's not going to come as a visitation from something outside of us. It is going to emerge from the burst of the actual presence that is within each one of us, that is our God-given right and ability to express, to harmonize, to heal, to know, to love, and to generate heaven consciousness on earth. When I was recently at a conference with Marianne Williamson, she reminded us in New Thought that we know how to do this work. We know how to do this work on the collective level. We may, in New Thought, have stepped out of the outside. We may have stepped out of the collective, stepped out of things. We may have a little bit of that in our history. But there is a great calling, because we actually have mastered and taught and lived this practice on the individual level, and so we know how to do it on the collective level. We already know. We've been doing it personally, and so to do it collectively is simply the next stage of our spiritual evolution and our growth. Friends, circulation is not an elective. We are circulating our consciousness and our energy constantly. No one gets to step out of that. Ever. We are one. So let's do it consciously. Let's check in instead of checking out. Use our practice to self-activate. We, as individuals, are constantly either part of the heaven or part of the hell. The choice is ours. And the biggest tool we have to transcend and to override even limited sense of conditioning that we may have, that may be known or unknown to us as individuals, that we may see or we may not see in the collective. There is no way to get beyond that unless we have a deep spiritual practice of meditating and opening the mind to go beyond what the human educated system, what the human psyche, whatever we inherited, can intuit and understand. The only way is to spend time in the silence, to spend time in the practice, to use mindfulness and mindfulness moments throughout our everyday, throughout every relationship and every experience. The author I told you about, Angel Kyoto Williams, she said, if you don't meditate, it's like eating without digesting. If you don't meditate, it's like eating without digesting. How fun does that sound? Rabbi Lerner, when I recently had the opportunity to spend time and experience him, he said, we need to get out of the box with our visions. And this is another key piece to why are the people of New Thought really charged with a great calling right now at this stage in humanity's development. And he spoke the idea that we're so good at visioning. Like, we kind of have like grown up with that tricycle of visioning, going like, okay, what can I create? What can I vision? Here's our call. It's to use the power of our visioning for the collective good. Use the power of our visioning for awakening. This is a time of malleable shift. This is a time where there is a huge, huge potentiality for shift. If we don't put anything in that space, something will just happen to be there. Are we going to be bold with our vision? Are we going to be bold with our vision? That's what Rabbi Lerner says. He says, this is the time to be bold with our vision, with our collective vision, to really be bold with it, to let go of the part of the mind that says, well, these things would be nice, these things. Well, everything's up for grabs now, friends. Everything is up for grabs now. We make a heaven or hell of this planet, of our collective, of our community, and we get the chance to create the heaven. Rabbi Lerner said, a world based on a new bottom line is what we need. He says, a new bottom line is one that judges the success of every sector, system, and institution of our society, from the economy to government to schools to healthcare and the legal system, all of it, based not on the old bottom line of whether they maximize money, profit, and power, but instead by the extent to which they maximize love and caring, kindness and generosity, empathy and compassion, social and economic and environmental justice, peace and nonviolence, and protection of the life support system of our planet, as well as encourage us to transcend a narrow utilitarian approach to nature and other human beings, and enhance our capacity to respond with awe and wonder to the universe, and to see the sacred in others and in all sentient beings. He says this new bottom line prioritizes the well-being of the planet and all of its inhabitants, as well as justice and peace over money, profit, and power. Charles Fillmore talked about this. He talked about this as a right understanding of divine law, the divine law of creation. That law that lets us, when we understand wisdom, when we understand divine ideals, lets us co-create. He said, through humanity, God is creating or manifesting outwardly that which exists in the ideal. Humanity must understand it and consciously cooperate in every thought with divine ideals. Humanity stands in the Godhead as the imaging faculty. We give form, we outline, condition, and relation to the infinite possibilities of the formless. That is our calling. So will we take on that calling? Will we have a bold vision? Will we operate from the collective consciousness of spiritual awakening? Rabbi Lerner says the task of birthing the next stage of consciousness is a joint task. The second coming. He didn't say that. I said that. He says, and it is one that faces each of us as a personal decision about how to lead our lives, to birth the next stage of consciousness of the human race, and in doing so, to bring God's presence more fully into this world. We don't need to stumble, and we don't need to walk, as the singer-songwriter Ellis says, when we could be flying. Namaste.